Congress doesn't just run on votes, it runs on leadership. The Speaker, majority and minority leaders, whips, and committee chairs decide what gets a vote, what dies quietly, and what becomes law. This video breaks down every type of U.S. Congress leadership change, why it happens, and the biggest turning points that reshape power inside the House and Senate. First, a quick reality check. Congress leadership changes in three main ways. 1. Elections flip party control and instantly reshuffle top jobs. 2. Internal party elections replace leaders even when the party stays in power. 3. Crises, scandals, resignations, health issues, or rebellions force abrupt takeovers that can change the entire agenda overnight. Start with the House, because the House is where leadership drama is the loudest. The Speaker of the House is not just a referee. The Speaker controls the floor schedule, influences committees, negotiates with the Senate and the White House, and often becomes the face of a party's national brand. That means Speaker changes are rarely routine. They're usually a sign that the party's center of gravity moved. In the early decades, Speakers were sometimes more like national party chiefs than modern parliamentary managers. Leadership changed as factions rose and fell, and the Speaker's power depended on how disciplined the party was. When parties were fragmented, Speakers were weaker. When parties were unified, Speakers could become political engines. Then comes one of the biggest structural shifts, the era of the Speaker as a boss. At times, Speakers built tight control over committee assignments and the rules of debate, turning the House into a machine. But that kind of power always creates a counter-reaction, because rank-and-file members eventually ask the dangerous question, why do we even need this person to control everything? That leads to one of the most important leadership change patterns in Congress history. Internal revolts that don't just replace a leader, but rewrite the rules of power. In the House, there were moments when members, sometimes from the Speaker's own party, rebelled to strip power away from the top and hand it back to committees or to a broader coalition. When that happens, leadership changes aren't about personality, they're about architecture. The House becomes a different institution. Now switch to the Senate. The Senate's leadership is quieter, but the control is real. The Senate Majority Leader decides what moves, how long debates last, and whether the chamber spends weeks on judges, foreign policy, or a single bill. Unlike the House, where the Speaker is a constitutional office, Senate leadership is more party-built, which means changes are often driven by internal trust. Can you count votes? Can you negotiate? Can you hold the caucus together? Historically, Senate leadership became more important as parties professionalized and the workload exploded. As America grew, the Senate couldn't function as a casual debating club anymore. Leadership became the traffic controller, and that makes the majority leader position one of the most powerful jobs in Washington. Here's the part most people miss. Committee chairs are also leadership, and committee leadership changes can matter as much as the Speaker. When party control flips, committee gavels flip. That can instantly change what gets investigated, what gets funded, and what gets buried. It's why midterm elections don't just change the vibe, they change the machinery. Another huge driver of leadership change is scandal. A leader doesn't have to be convicted of anything to lose the job. Sometimes it's enough that donors panic, members fear losing their seats, or the media cycle won't die. The party will replace a leader to stop the bleeding, even if the leader insists they're innocent. In Congress, perception can be as lethal as proof. And then there's the most brutal trigger, internal rebellion over strategy. If leadership can't pass budgets, can't prevent shutdowns, or can't protect vulnerable members, the party starts whispering. That whisper becomes meetings. Meetings become a challenge. And suddenly the leader who looked untouchable is out, sometimes in a single day. So if you're watching this thinking, okay, but does any of this matter for regular people? Yes. Leadership changes determine whether Congress focuses on lowering costs, investigating opponents, passing major reforms, or doing nothing for months. Leadership is the steering wheel. Different hands, different direction. If you want the second half, where modern leadership changes turn into headline-level chaos, hit like and subscribe now. Because Part 2 is where the era of cable news, party warfare, and surprise ousters turns Congress leadership into a reality show with nuclear consequences. Modern Congress leadership changes feel different for one reason: the cameras never leave. A leadership fight used to be smoke-filled room politics. Now it's live-streamed pressure, donor panic in real time, and members posting their rebellion like it's a campaign ad. Let's start with the modern House. Over the last few decades, speaker changes increasingly happen for one of three reasons: a wave election that flips the chamber, a leadership collapse caused by budget warfare, or a party civil war where a faction decides the speaker is not one of us. The speaker's job became harder because the coalition needed to govern became harder to hold. The most dramatic recent pattern is this: speakers used to fall mainly after losing elections. Now they can fall even while their party still holds the majority, because their own side removes them. That's a massive institutional shift. It means a speaker is no longer just negotiating with the other party. They're negotiating with their own party's most angry faction every single week. And once a party proves it can remove its own speaker, the threat becomes permanent. Every major vote becomes hostage-style politics: give us what we want, or we blow up leadership. That's not just drama, it's a new operating system. Now, Senate leadership changes are usually less theatrical, but arguably more consequential.
Why?
Because the Senate runs on time, procedure, and deals. A majority leader who controls the calendar can decide whether the country spends months confirming judges, negotiating foreign aid, or fighting over shutdowns. Senate leadership changes often happen when a caucus believes a new leader can manage the battlefield better, or when age, health, or generational pressure makes the transition inevitable. Another modern engine of leadership change: fundraising. In today's Congress, leaders are expected to raise huge money for their party. If they can't, they get blamed for losses. And if they can, they gain protection even when members dislike them. That's why leadership contests aren't only about ideology. They're about cash, strategy, and survival. Let's talk about the leadership roles people ignore but that control everything: whips. Whips are vote counters and enforcers. When a party keeps losing close votes, whip leadership can change because members conclude the leadership can't count. When whips change, it often signals that the caucus is reorganizing its internal discipline. Committee leadership changes have also become more weaponized. When control flips, committees can turn into investigative cannons. Suddenly, chairs aren't just writing legislation, they're driving narratives. That means committee chair changes can change the national conversation even when no laws pass. Now for the engagement fuel. The most controversial leadership changes are the ones that happen during a crisis, like budget deadlines, shutdown threats, or major wars, because they look irresponsible to voters but can be perfectly rational inside the party. Members don't ask, "Will this look stable?" They ask, "Will I survive my primary?" That's how leadership turns into a mirror of fear. And that leads to the biggest takeaway of the whole video. Congress leadership changes are no longer just transitions. They're signals of what kind of Congress you're about to get. If leadership changes toward hardliners, expect confrontation and messaging votes. If leadership changes toward deal-makers, expect compromise attempts, but also backlash from activists. If leadership changes toward fundraisers, expect party discipline and national strategy over local issues. So what does it mean for you watching at home? It means your healthcare bill, your taxes, your student loans, your aid package, your border policy, and even whether the government shuts down can depend on a handful of internal votes that most people never see. That's why leadership changes matter. They decide what Congress even means in a given year. Now here's the part that keeps people to the end. Leadership changes often predict the next election. When a party replaces its leaders, it's usually admitting something is broken: strategy, messaging, unity, or credibility. Sometimes the replacement fixes it. Sometimes it accelerates collapse. But it's almost never neutral. If you want a follow-up episode that lists the biggest speaker and majority leader transitions in a tight timeline, with the major triggers behind each one, comment "timeline" and say whether you want House or Senate first. And if this video helped you understand the power behind the scenes, subscribe, like, and share. Because the only thing more dangerous than a powerful Congress is a powerful Congress that nobody is paying attention to.